Hey there, welcome to Goals, Grit, and some woo-woo shit. I'm your host, Una Duncan, and I once put sliced potatoes, raw potatoes, on my boob. I did that because I had a blocked and infected milk duct, and my amazing midwife, who gave me incredible care throughout my pregnancy, said that it was a traditional remedy for that condition. And I was in bed with a fever with my newborn next to me, and my husband was being a really good sport, and he's putting the sliced potatoes on my swollen boob, but he was also saying, "What the fuck are we doing?" If you, dear listener, have ever had a moment of participating in a natural health remedy and maybe also had the thought of what the fuck are we doing? This episode is for you. Today, I am talking to Dr. Jonathan Stea, who is an award-winning science communicator, clinical psychologist, adjunct professor at the University of Calgary, and author of the new book, Mind the Science: Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. Now, I know I've had quite a few guests on here, and the conversation often turns to wellness and fitness BS on the internet. But I really wanted to bring Jonathan on because he specializes in mental health pseudoscience. So today, we talk about the difference between alternative, functional, and integrative medicine, the history of wellness grifters, including the very wild story of Dr. Kellogg, who used to serve his own poo at dinner parties, and how his ideas are still being used today. Why distrust in the medical system is both 100% valid and dangerous, and how you can improve your mental health literacy and not be one of the many very smart people who are currently falling for bad science.
Breaking news. Your dream life isn't going to happen because you made a vision board. You're going to need goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. This podcast is about getting clarity on what you want, having the grit to do the actual work, and most importantly, constantly training your brain to be your bitch. Ready to be inspired? Here is your host, best-selling author, Una Duncan.
Jonathan Stea, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
I am so excited. After reading your book, I am been so excited for this conversation. So I want to start out by asking you, how is pseudoscience hurting our mental well-being right now?
God, I don't even know where to start with that question because it's just everywhere. You know, I wrote a book about this topic a year ago, and unfortunately, I think it's even more relevant a year later today.
Yeah,
especially,
I was going to ask you what's changed since you wrote the book. Yeah,
especially since what's going on in the U.S., which has a global ripple effect. So pseudoscience, it harms us in myriad different ways. I mean, what helps me understand it is thinking about it in at least three ways. So, pseudoscience can affect our health directly as a result of the treatments or the approaches used. So people can actually get sick and in severe cases die from a pseudoscientific treatment. And there's a number of examples of that. More commonly, I would say, is that, indirect harm can result from pseudoscientific treatment. So what I mean by that is when people are seeking out pseudoscientific approaches, they are wasting hard-earned time, money, and resources on those things. And it's not just that, it's that while they're seeking those other resources, they're not accessing evidence-based care. And so their health symptoms, and particularly their mental health symptoms, could be getting worse. And that has a negative impact on someone's health. And then I think the third level, which we kind of briefly mentioned, is at the societal level or the social level, because when pseudoscience becomes really baked into our culture and our social media and our healthcare institutions themselves, then we are just being blown away with constant misinformation, which can negatively impact people's decisions and their decision making when it comes to making health choices, like whether to be vaccinated or not, or whether to seek healthcare from bona fide health professionals or not.
Yeah, which is what we're seeing right now. Okay, before we get further into that, can you just quickly clarify, what are we talking about when we say pseudoscience? Can you define that term and give us a few examples that we would all recognize?
Absolutely. So, and it's a good question because pseudoscience itself is a nebulous term. It sort of has it's murky. And the reason for that is because it's a complex topic. I mean, pseudoscience itself has been debated in the history and philosophy of science for forever, since science was developed. And so in the philosophy of science, the task of figuring out what qualifies as pseudoscience is known as the demarcation problem. So it asks, where do we demarcate or draw that line between science and pseudoscience? And essentially, I think what's most helpful for people is you can think of pseudoscience as a probabilistic endeavor, meaning it's not just, there's no single clear criterion that tells one from the other, but rather there's a cluster of warning signs or a cluster of red flags. And the more red flags that you see and the more warning signs that you hear, the more likely it is that you've unearthed something pseudoscientific. And so in the book, I list 9 of these red flags, say, and I really would love people to memorize them if they can. I had to, because that's the best way, I think, that we can strengthen our grift detectors, so to speak. So I can maybe give 3 or 1 or 2 brief examples.
I would love that. Yes, please. Yeah.
So, one example, when it comes to marketing health treatments, one hallmark sign, and again, it's none of these single criterions, it's sort of a cluster, but one hallmark would be an over-reliance on what's called anecdotal evidence. So what that means is you go to an Instagram influencer's page or an alternative medicine website, and you just find testimonials splattered all over it. So saying, my treatment works because Bob or Karen says it works. And of course, that's a good starting point for research, but we know that in order to determine whether a treatment works, we need higher quality scientific studies like randomized controlled trials. And so that's just one kind of warning sign. And the reason that one is such a powerful marketing tool is because it kind of capitalizes on one of the biggest fallacies that our brains fall prey to, which is, it's a mouthful. It's called the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, which basically...
Oh, that one.
that one. All it means is just because something happened first and then something happened after that, the first event caused the second event. So just because we shower every morning and the sun rises doesn't mean our shower causes the sun to rise. So we see similar claims in the wellness industry, like, I vaccinated my kid and now they have autistic symptoms, therefore vaccines cause autism. That's just not how it works. People also use that to market their treatments. I took this treatment, my symptoms went away, therefore it works. Well, symptoms can go away for a whole variety of reasons. So that's just one flag of many. You asked for some examples, so maybe I'll give you the most crystal clear warning sign, which helps separate the wheat from the chaff. So this one is, I would call it it's the way to describe it is when claims are divorced from the broader scientific literature. So what that means is basically seeing an outlandish claim. So for example, a crystal clear example of pseudoscience is homeopathy. Homeopathic products are in Shoppers Drug Mart, they're in pharmacies, they're everywhere. In the US, it's a $1 billion industry. And that's just in the US alone. Homeopathy cannot work, because if it did work, it would undermine all of our physics departments and all the universities, and it would undermine fundamental principles of pharmacology, because homeopathy says in order for a remedy to be more effective, you have to dilute its active ingredient, say aspirin, in water out of existence so that not a single molecule is left in that solution, and that the water somehow remembers the molecules. So, these are absurd claims, right? But they're real claims and they're marketed to us. So that's sort of a big red flag, similar to energy healing.
Okay, before we get off homeopathy, though, I'm having this reaction, and I know so many people listening will have the same reaction. But people I know and trust totally have advised homeopathy, or if it didn't work, then it wouldn't be in Shoppers Drug Mart, or it wouldn't, or my friend had homeopathy and it totally cured their blank. In my case, my midwife that I loved, who did such a good job caring for me, gave me homeopathy for, I forget. I don't know. My milk was not doing the thing it was supposed to do. I don't remember, but I just think of all these people I know and love and trust, or institutions I know and love and trust, who have recommended that to me. And although what you just said makes total sense, how could something that is nothing have any effect? I'm like, of course. I'm blushing, thinking like, oh my gosh, how would I believe that? But then I think of all these people and institutions that I trust that have recommended that. So what should I do with that reaction?
I think we have to sit with that reaction and just kind of, it's not about blame and shame either. I want to make that very clear. We're all targeted with misinformation. We're all targeted with pseudoscience from from various actors in the wellness industry and larger scale organizations. The wellness industry is a $5.6 trillion industry worldwide. So there's a lot of money to be made. But I do want to make clear that it's not about blame and shame. And my beef, so to speak, is with the people who sell these products and preying upon people's vulnerabilities, their financial vulnerabilities and their emotional vulnerabilities, because that's just not a good thing. It dupes people and it doesn't actually respect people's autonomy. In the wellness industry, it is largely unregulated. It is not tested for safety and effectiveness, unlike big pharma, which has its own problems and its own conflicts of interest, but at least, and its own corrupt research, but at least it makes an effort to test for safety and effectiveness. Homeopathy, rather the wellness industry at large, doesn't. And you're right, these products can be marketed to us by seemingly credible places. In Ontario, for example, homeopathy is the only province in Canada that is a regulated discipline. So what that means is if anyone in Alberta or BC, you and I can call ourselves homeopaths and set up a product and sell it online and make money. But you can't do that in Ontario because it's regulated. You need a license and it's a protected title, just like a psychologist or a physician or a nurse. And so what that does is those regulators actually bake the legitimization of pseudoscience into our legal systems now. And so that is also a very dangerous thing. The same thing happens in India with their whole
Ayurveda
system. Ayurveda, exactly. So you're right. Just because our products are marketed to us from seemingly credible sources, that doesn't mean that they're safe or effective. And it's worse when that happens from, there's a phenomenon called the Einstein effect, which basically means we're more likely to believe claims from people who are MDs, PhDs, or seemingly have, respectable names other than, compared to, say, a self-styled wellness guru.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I guess when I hear that, I think, well, if there is a regulatory body in Ontario for homeopathy, surely they are holding practitioners to certain standards, or, there's got to be some legitimacy there, no?
It begs the question, right? It's unclear to me what's worse, a grifter with no license and no accountability, or a grifter with a license and feigned accountability. Because if that regulator is holding them to a particular standard, what is that standard? We know that homeopathy, for example, does not work. It's scientifically implausible. It literally can't work. So what is the standard? The only thing I can think of in my personal view is that the one good reason to regulate something like homeopathy is that when it goes unregulated in the wellness industry, we don't know what we're getting in the product. There's often adulterants in it. It could be cut with anything. Like I said, you and I I could bottle something in my office today and send it off. But at least with if you have something regulated, then at least it's more likely to be regulated for safety, but it doesn't mean that it's effective.
Okay, so you gave us, a couple of criteria there, and one example, homeopathy. We're talking specifically about mental health. What's another pseudoscience we might see when it comes to mental health?
Well, it's interesting because this was sort of a learning curve for me when I set out to write the book, because my book is specifically focused on mental health and I'm a clinical psychologist. That's what I do as my day job, treating people every day who have been harmed by pseudoscience. But it turns out that when I started doing my research for the book, and I've been kind of doing this for years now, I thought I would see more specific pseudoscientific approaches geared towards mental health. And there's things like conversion therapy, which tries to change someone's sexual orientation or identity. There's particular ones geared towards autism, like chelation therapy, which tries to detox heavy metals from them. So there's things like that. But more generally, a hallmark of pseudoscience is that their approaches often market themselves as a panacea. They're cure-alls for everything. So homeopathy or energy healing or someone's detox protocol or their diet protocol can treat not only your depression and your post-traumatic stress disorder, but also your cancer and your COVID-19.
And it'll make you skinny and rich and get a boyfriend. Yeah, totally. Okay, I'm with you. Actually, can I run? I've designed, because I'm more in the fitness space, so I get a lot of women's health information coming at me that is bonkers town. And so I came up with 6 C's system to help people figure out who is full of shit. So let me run this by you, and you can tell me if you think it also applies to pseudoscience in the mental health space. So the
Love
first
this.
C is credentials. Does this person actually have credentials to say what to in this area specifically? Second one, consensus. Is this someone who has peers that agree with them, or are they the one person that's like, I'm the one person that's going to tell you the truth about this kind of thing? In which, and again, and I love what you said there, it's a cluster. It's not that any of these is a definite like demarcation of this person is full of shit, but if they have a lot of these, it's like, your red flag should be going off. Third C, conflict of interest. Are they making money by making you believe this? Fourth, common sense. Are they telling you that fruit is making you fat or you should put coffee up your butt? Common sense. Homeopathy, nothing. The more nothing it is, the better it is for you, right? Like common sense. Does this make sense to you? Oh, 5, confirmation bias. Do you like this information because it's something that you want to believe anyway? So that's kind of on the user. And the 6th one is calm. Are they presenting this information in a way that is calm, or are they trying to make you angry or fearful and have a total extreme view that is trying to evoke crazy emotion in you?
Oh, that is music to my ears. I love
good.
that.
You like it. Okay.
I love it because it sort of blends those pseudoscientific warning signs and just the way in which pseudoscience is marketed and sold, which is, like you said, it can be emotion laden, over generalized, hyped up. And yeah, you just nailed it all. I love that.
Okay. Did I miss anything? Is there anything you're like, there's a red flag you missed?
There's
because you have 9 and I have 6.
I have 9. I also talk about what I term alternative medicine tropes. So I think the reality is that there's no fixed number. There's a lot of these. So alternative medicine tropes are essentially repeated themes and ideas that I try to highlight and make people aware of, which they can also look for on websites. So, for example, one that I can't stand and that I hate and that we see it everywhere now, especially, but it's been around for forever, since the dawn of the wellness industry, is a big red flag is watch out for the term root cause, meaning wellness influencers will say, we treat the root cause, but not just that. They will juxtapose it with, we treat the root cause. We don't just mask the symptoms. That's what modern medicine does. That is a old, tired trope that you will see, because when you dig deeper, you often find that root cause that they're pitching is often a pseudoscientific or false root cause. It's a diet deficiency that we didn't know that we had that's unsupported, or it's trying to unblock our energy blockages to treat our depression. So it's not that the root cause per se is bad. It's that modern medicine aims to solve root causes all the time. That's what we do. But it's the rhetoric that is how the wellness industry packages it. So I have a whole variety of alternative medicine tropes that market themselves in that way. And the whole point of that is to promote a really divisive, polarizing narrative that says we're the wellness industry, or we know what we're doing, modern medicine doesn't, because I really try to make the case in the book that alternative medicine itself is not just a set of unsupported treatments or a set of pseudoscientific treatments, because once a treatment gets enough evidence, it can cross that somewhat arbitrary threshold into evidence-based medicine. Rather, alternative medicine is more an ideology. It has this narrative that's been around since the dawn of the wellness industry. It's very moralizing and blaming and polarizing and divisive, and it requires demonizing modern medicine. That's how it grifts. That's how it thrives. And so that's a huge point as well that I would add to your signs, and as well as my 9 pseudoscientific red flags.
I love that you pointed out the tropes, because I did want to ask you about some of the other long-standing ideas that we have about mental health that sound really good, but that are leading us astray. And even the terminology that you used about, I think you used alternative medicine. And at one point in your book, you said that, it was called alternative medicine, then it was complementary medicine, then it was integrative medicine, and then it's functional medicine. And I was like, whoa, what? I want my medicine to be integrative. I want it to be functional. Like, these are, words that we really like, or natural. Can you talk about the distinction between all of those terms, or whether they all really are the same and they're a bit they're marketing the same. It's like the Atkins diet becomes the keto diet, becomes the whatever. Or are they all the same? And also, what are some other tropes that sound really good to us that we really want to believe, like root cause, like natural, that are leading us down a pseudoscience path that might hurt us?
Yes, I'd love to give some examples, and unfortunately, I wish it wasn't the case. But those terms that you mentioned, integrative medicine, functional medicine, complementary and alternative medicine, which is CAM, which is an acronym, those are unfortunately brands. They're branding terms, and there's medical historians have traced this. Alternative medicine, that term wasn't used until the 1970s. Then in the 90s, we got integrative medicine and functional medicine, and the idea is essentially the goal is to sneak pseudoscience into healthcare at large, because when you dig deeper, they're promoting the same kinds of products. But you're right, they sound great. That's literally the point. It's like, who doesn't want to integrate the best of both worlds, the best of modern medicine and the best of alternative medicine? But again, it's predicated on a philosophy that's not evidence-based, because by virtue of promoting pseudoscientific treatments, healthcare providers have an ethical obligation to evidence-based medicine. I'm not allowed to offer unequivocal pseudoscientific treatments legally and ethically. So it's a marketing ploy, unfortunately, and it's quite deceptive. You were asking about other kinds of tropes. There's so many, and some of them take the form of fallacies as well. So you mentioned natural. So just because something is natural sounds great. Who doesn't like something that's natural? But it's a fallacy. Our brains are wired to want to think something's natural. You know what else is natural? COVID-19 and poison ivy, and there's lots of naturally unhelpful things. And just because something is synthetic doesn't mean that that's an unhelpful thing either. So that's a trope. People will often say, well, this treatment's been used for thousands of years. That's an appeal to tradition fallacy. Just because something's been used for thousands of years doesn't mean that it's now safe and effective. So those are kind of fallacies. A trope that you might see in the fitness space where you are is there's a huge one in the diet world and in the nutrition world, which is food is medicine. And this one is particularly pernicious because all of these they're like propaganda. They take a kernel of truth and then they blow it out of proportion. So what I mean by that is, obviously food is medicine. I work in a hospital clinic where we treat people with severe addiction and concurrent mental disorders. And part of my day job every day is helping people manage or get on track with exercise, nutrition, etc., in addition to psychotherapy. So self-care, like sleeping well, eating well, exercising, that's foundation to mental health treatment. The problem is that in the wellness industry, they market that as a cure-all, and they package it as if that's what's going to, and that if you're not doing that, there's a moral quality to it. And then not only that, they're selling it. They're selling their own brand of food as medicine. So it's a particular diet or it's a particular exercise regimen, which has no or little, or if any evidence at all to support it. So very, very little evidentiary backing to support its use. And again, it's often packaged in those tropes that I mentioned. It's like, modern medicine doesn't know what they're doing. They just try to drug you up with pharmaceuticals, and food is actually medicine. So buy my supplements and take my 7-step exercise regimen for your bipolar disorder. So that's just the awareness that I want to try to bring to people, is that's a ploy. I mean, so that's what I mean, that food is medicine is a trope, because yes, food is medicine, but not in the way that it's sold in the wellness industry.
Mm-hmm. And can you just quickly make a distinction between that and the legit science of nutritional psychology?
Yeah. So the area of nutritional psychology, nutritional psychiatry is a promising area of research. It's fascinating. We need to know more about it. The problem is that it's an incredibly complex, like all areas of health conditions, as particularly in the science of psychopathology and the science of mental health, is hard. We just don't have a good data to support any specific dietary regimen to treat someone's depression or their generalized anxiety disorder or the post-traumatic stress disorder. Really, what it comes down to is really basics. Like we know that people need exercise, we know that they need nutrition, but it's not that there's a particular diet or exercise regimen that we can pitch as a cure-all for everyone, that's where the research needs to come in and evaluate particular protocols. You don't see that in the wellness industry with people who don't have credentials, as you're saying, who are marketing their own brand. And that's where it can get, that's where it can sort of fall off the rails for people. And I'd say it's a bit more insidious than that, because like you mentioned, there's also there's a moralizing quality too that's in our current culture, and it was inherited from the dawn of the wellness industry, which really overemphasizes our own personal behaviors in shaping or molding our health, and downplays the role of genetics, social factors, and just plain old bad luck. And again, that's sort of a piece of propaganda, because obviously we have to, in all health treatments, we have to encourage people to get motivated to do, to emphasize their personal control. But in the wellness industry, it's that if you're not exercising well and if you're not eating well, then you're doing something wrong, and kind of shame. And if you take pills or medication, there's a kind of pill shaming component to that, and a patient blaming component. And that's,
and if you were just disciplined enough, virtuous enough. Can I actually hold you on the virtue thing, the heal through virtue approach? Can you tell us about Dr. Kellogg and how all this started and how it kind of shows up now?
Yeah, so Dr. Kellogg, I mentioned there's some founders of the wellness industry as we know it, and Dr. Kellogg was one of them. And in I think it was 1878. This is going back well over a century.
And this is
ago.
Kellogg as in Special K, right?
His brother founded the cereal company, but they worked together. Yeah, so his brother founded the cereal company. John Harvey Kellogg. So Will Keith was his brother. John Harvey Kellogg ran something called the Battle Creek Sanitarium, which at the time was a modern day spa and a medical center, and it attracted the wealthy people of its time and celebrities, etc. And he would just basically sell his own ideas about health and health treatments. And what it came down to is the similar stuff that we see today. It was really that everything could be treated with a trifecta recipe of his own version of how to get your sleep, your exercise, and your nutrition, and just really ignored everything else. But it was a bit worse than that, because he called it virtuous eating and virtuous health. And he would really demonize and moralize people that weren't kind of following what he thought was ideal. So, for example, he looked down upon things like masturbation and thought that in women that should be treated with pure carbolic acid to the genital region, and similar with boys, they should be circumcised, or their hands should be tied. So there was a lot of moralizing, and obesity was linked to not just, obesity was regarded as a moral failing, and that it's linked to mental illness and cancer and depravity, and just really looked down on people. And so that's sort of what I mean by the modern wellness industry inheriting some of those ideas. And he wasn't the only kind of influencer at the time that kind of promoted those kinds of ideas. And we see it right to today. If you look at the whole MAHA movement in the US with RFK Jr.'s, big push, there's the White House is posting on Twitter, showing RFK Jr. do these pull-ups or push-ups, etc. And again, it's not necessarily that these are bad things. It's just going back to the old idea of, when you dig further, he's not just doing push-ups and pull-ups, but he's blaming mass shootings on antidepressant medications, and he's gutting our healthcare systems and cutting grants and demonizing vaccines, which incidentally also happened at the dawn of the wellness industry over a century ago. The modern medicine and the wellness industry grew in tandem around that time. So it's
Can I just interject?
Now. Yes.
With my favorite Dr. Kellogg story about how he claims that if you did eat virtuously, then your poo wouldn't stink. And that he, at parties, would go around with a sample of his poo and say, "Here, doesn't stink, does it?"
Yes. And he that's exactly what he did. And he put it in front of his dinner guests at the dinner table is apparently what the historians are saying. And he would sing the chewing song, which basically meant he wanted people to chew their food to oblivion. And he would say, the song would go something like, "Chew, chew, chew. That is the thing to do." So just weird, bizarre. He was very eccentric.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the ripple effect of that happening now. And you mentioned Maha. And in general, I mean, there's a huge cultural shift towards suspicion of mainstream science and medicine. And I think some of it is valid. I mean, there's the ideas that some science is outdated, that it's maybe discriminating against women in other cultural traditions or people who are marginalized, that it's corporate, that it's gatekeeping. And you actually say in your book that some distrust in science and medicine is actually really valid. So, how much of that suspicion is really important? And when does it veer off into danger territory?
Yes, distrust in science is well earned, and that's just the way it goes. It has demonized minority groups and women, et cetera, in the past, or not studied them as much as they have. And the nature of science itself unfortunately, our science, science is not just a robotic, objective process as we like to imagine. Part of science literacy is understanding that it very much is a social process. It's done by humans and conducted by humans in our very human social institutions. And like anything human, that can go awry and that can become corrupt. And so when we have gaps in science and gaps in our knowledge, it's a call to fill those gaps with better transparency, better science, addressing conflicts of interest, doing better competent science and ethical patient care. That's what we need. The gaps in our science and knowledge doesn't justify filling those gaps with this pseudoscientific caulk, so to speak, which is filled in by the wellness industry. So you ask, when does it go awry, or kind of, when does it become problematic? It's that the wellness industry takes that kernel of truth, that there's corruption, like any piece of propaganda, takes a kernel of truth and then it blows it and amplifies it for its own interests. So it says, yes, science has done X, Y, and Z, which has been bad in the past. You can't trust them, but you can trust us with our narrative and our supplements and, again, our pseudoscientific approaches. And that's the bait and switch, right? It's like, yes, there's some truth in that, but the wellness industry is not the solution to the gaps in science. The solution is better science, better transparency, and accountability. It's not the wellness grifters who are profiting financially off the magnification of that distrust and couching it in conspiracy theories and again, amplifying it and distorting it along the way.
But on the other hand, it's a bit of a tough sell. If I am sitting here and I'm suffering, and you tell me, well, yes, there's some problems with our medical industry, but the problem, the solution is better science. I'm like, I don't have time for better science. I'm suffering now, and I know you probably don't have the answer to that because that's the $1 million question, right? But at one point in your book, you said that often these things do work as a placebo effect, and I guess I wondered, is that so bad? I mean, especially if we're talking about mental wellness here. If it really is literally all in my head, what is the problem with me using a placebo that makes me feel better?
It's a great question. And the placebo effect is used in alternative medicine and in modern medicine. We use that too for our own treatments. Our own, psychiatric medications capitalize on placebo effects, and psychotherapy capitalizes on it as well. So do alternative medicine treatments. Where it becomes problematic is there's something called, my friend and colleague Timothy Caulfield, he's a professor at the University of Alberta, and he coined this term called the two hats fallacy. And what that means is it essentially outlines the ethical dilemma that you're essentially positing. It's the idea that as a bona fide healthcare professional, a psychologist, a physician, doctor, a nurse, social worker, whatever it is, we are, if you look at our code of ethics, baked into our codes of ethics and our legal standards of practice, so our licenses, we have to practice from an evidence-based perspective. We need to practice science-based medicine. That's just, medical ethics has been a rich literature that has been studied for decades, and we've arrived that this is the best way to treat health conditions. We need evidence. And so what that means is when someone is coming to me, for example, for a treatment, we need to be very forthright and honest when it comes to the informed consent process. I need to be very accurate with someone in terms of what are the benefits of this treatment and what are the harms. And when we encourage an approach to treatment that purely relies on placebo effects, that's fine, but we need to be forthright and honest about that. And that's not what we see in the alternative medicine industry. So if I were to offer something like homeopathy, as we discussed, I wouldn't do it because ethically I can't. But if I were to do it, I'd have to say something like, here's homeopathy. It doesn't work better than the placebo effect. It doesn't work beyond the placebo effect. And there's other evidence-based treatments that are more likely to work. Now you're free to use your autonomy. So That's the approach that we would have to take.
Can you tell us about, I'm wondering, is there ever been an example where a pseudoscience has gathered enough evidence to sort of cross that demarcation line towards an evidence-based treatment? Like psychology, for example, was that ever considered a pseudoscience?
Oh, psychology gets attacked all the time. We have to strengthen our scientific chops, so to speak. So yeah, I mean the broad discipline of psychology, but I'd say all area of the social sciences. We need good science in order to avoid being charged with pseudoscientific practices. So certainly that can happen in bona fide health professions as well. I can give one example of a treatment approach that used to be heavily regarded as a pseudoscience, and now it's sort of shifted into evidence-based territory, which is something called EMDR, eye movement and desensitization. Yeah, so it's a treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. So basically, it has people move their eyes back and forth, and that the eye movements are supposed to. It's much more than this. It's part of the process, but it's the eye movements are supposed to have a role in the treatment of PTSD. And for a very long time, this was considered quackery because we just don't know, what are the role of the eye movements? And instead, we thought that the actual mechanism of change was something called exposure, because while you're having someone move their eyes, they're also exposing themselves to the trauma by telling you about their trauma. And we know that exposure therapy is an evidence-based treatment. So nowadays, there's been randomized control trials on EMDR, and it's been found that, hey, it can help with post-traumatic stress disorder. But now the debate comes down to, again, is it the exposure? What's the active ingredient? Is it the exposure or is it the eye movements? And so that's just sort of an ongoing debate. That's just kind of one example. But you're right. I mean, things, even bona fide health professions can be tarnished with pseudoscience. It just so happens that the wellness industry, the beating heart of the wellness industry, flows with pseudoscience. There's just more of it. Alternative medicine practitioners often put the cart before the horse, before things are ready to be marketed. And that's my worry. I can take another example in the world of mental health, which is, for example, psychedelic assisted therapy. So using things like MDMA, ecstasy, ketamine, to treat things like depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a very cool, promising area of research, and I would love for it to work because we need to expand our arsenal of tools to help people. That's what we all want, but we need good science to back it up. And unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, I mean, psychedelics were illegal for a very long time, so that stifled scientific progress into this area. So now it's just, it was hot in the 70s, and then it went dark for decades, and now there's a resurgence into the science, which is a really fantastic thing. But the current science we have for psychedelic assisted therapies is unfortunately plagued with bad science. There's just a lot of dropouts. Sample sizes are small. There can be adverse effects. Again, the science of mental health treatment is really complicated. So I love the fact that we're studying this stuff, and that I'm hoping that we can add it to our arsenal. That's a very different thing in the wellness world, where you'll get a non-credentialed person take a patient with post-traumatic stress disorder on a 5-day wellness retreat to the jungle and do some ayahuasca, and then have them, tell you about their PTSD along with other people. I mean, that's very dangerous. And so that's the difference, where you can see they're putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Can you tell us about the anti-psychiatry movement of the mid 20th century? Was it? Is that when that happened? And why it was actually a good thing?
Yeah, the anti-psychiatry movement, and people are often familiar with the anti-vaccine movement, but less familiar with the anti-psychiatry movement. So it dates back to at least the 1960s or so. it started as like you mentioned, a really good thing. It was a pushback against psychiatry's various missteps. So there was this, inappropriate pathologizing of minority groups. There was inhumane asylum care and, insane hospitals. There was this perceived arbitrariness of diagnosis. So we don't know what we're doing when we diagnose people. And essentially, there was a group of folks who got together and pushed back against science. So Thomas Sass was a disgruntled psychiatrist at the time, and he pushed back against it. R.D. Laing was another who coined the term anti-psychiatry in 1967. David Cooper did that. R.D. Laing was another member of the anti-psychiatry movement. Michel Foucault was one of its intellectual pillars. These guys were rallying against all of that stuff. The good news is that it worked, because basically by the 1980s or so, psychiatry got its act together more. It closed a lot of those asylums and moved patient care into the community and into hospitals. There became a much more lively focus on what we now call the biopsychosocial model of mental health. So looking at the biological contributions, the psychological and the social contributions to mental illness and their treatments, instead of this siloed focus on pill dispensing. And so that was a fantastic thing, and it worked. And psychiatry adapted and became a much more scientific and humane discipline. Unfortunately, the anti-psychiatry movement, it worked, but it was a movement that outlived its cause, because nowadays what you see is it exists as largely a disorganized entity on social media and by other kind of disgruntled psychiatrists or psychologists or scholars that will publish their findings in, I'll back up. They don't publish their findings. They market their findings in non-peer-reviewed sources like books and blogs and on websites that are dedicated to flaming psychiatry in a way that really dodges scientific critique. So websites like Mad in America. And like I mentioned, what we see nowadays is the reason that this is dangerous is because a lot of anti-psychiatry tropes, like I mentioned, the alternative medicine tropes, there's also anti-psychiatry tropes, which are repeated ideas or themes. And they get parroted by really big influencers like Elon Musk, for example, tweeting and posting to hundreds and thousands, millions of people that SSRI medications, which are antidepressant medications, are more harmful than helpful. Or you get guys like Andrew Tate, who's a big influencer, calling people, I'll use his words, fat, lazy, only fat, lazy men are the ones who get depression. And essentially, they're repeating anti-psychiatry tropes, which are that mental illness doesn't exist. That's an anti-psychiatry trope. They don't think that schizophrenia exists, or depression, or ADHD, or PTSD. And another anti-psychiatry trope is that, again, all psychiatric medications are more harmful than helpful. And again, this stuff is now being echoed by people like RFK Jr., who is the head of the U.S. public health care system. So these aren't trivial. And I'm not saying necessarily that guys like Elon Musk or Andrew Tate are active players in the anti-psychiatry movement, but what they're doing is parroting these tropes that have been baked into our culture as a result of social media and its amplification.
And when they parrot those tropes, they're offering alternative or virtuous eating or a special diet or something like that in its place to people who are suffering from those complaints.
Every time. And I try to make that clear as well, because it's not just that the anti-vaccine movement and anti-psychiatry movement exists. It's that they are bedfellows with the wellness industry. And that's always happened. And the reason for that is that the wellness industry and anti-science movements need that polarizing, divisive narrative that I talked about. They have to demonize modern medicine, because if modern medicine is wrong, then they're better positioned to sell and to grift, to sell their products and services.
You mentioned mental illnesses like schizophrenia and depression. Can you clarify? I think you said in your book that it's possible to be mentally healthy and still have a mental illness. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean those are tough terms as well. So usually, to simplify it, when we speak of mental illness, we typically think of things like mental disorders or psychiatric disorders. So they are listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, things like schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder. Depression itself happens to be an umbrella term because depressive symptoms can show up in a variety of other mental disorders like bipolar disorder or schizoaffective disorder, etc. So, I mean, it gets quite nuanced, but basically mental illness is psychopathology. So, these diagnosable mental disorders. Mental health, on the other hand, I think the best way to understand that is trying to figure out a way to live a high quality of life, to cope with adversity, to cope with stressors, to roll with life's punches, so to speak, to find meaningful pursuits, to have healthy relationships, to cultivate meaningful connections. All of that is essentially what mental health is. So that's what we try to do. For example, I'm in my clinic, we treat people with mental disorders who have mental illness. So someone with schizophrenia can have diagnosable schizophrenia, but the goal is to get them to a point where maybe they're on medication and their symptoms have stabilized, so they don't hallucinate anymore, and they don't hear auditory voices, and they've recently got a job, and they've got a partner now, and they're volunteering, and they're finding, they're doing hobbies and interests. So in that case, I'd say they're experiencing mental health despite having a mental illness.
Okay, that makes sense. You talk about mental health literacy. Can you define that? And for those who want to sharpen their own mental health literacy, where should they start?
Mental health literacy it has multiple components. So it's basically trying to understand the nature of mental disorders and their treatment. It's knowing when, where, and how to get help. It's knowing how to actually become mentally healthy. So in the ways that I just mentioned. So, trying to find self-care activities, meaningful pursuits, relationships, etc. It's trying to learn all of this stuff. And and it's also another core component of mental health literacy is trying to decrease stigma along the way. So there's a scientific literature about mental health literacy. In short, it's just basically means trying to increase our literacy or our understanding about mental health and mental illness. And that is no easy feat. And so, I would encourage people again, and it's hard to do, especially in our current environment, because I think the best way to do that is to try to learn about it. And the way to learn about it is to seek credible sources to do so. So I mentioned ones like, say, the American Psychiatric Association or American Psychological Association, the Canadian Psychological Association. These places will have fact sheets, resources. You can ask bona fide health clinicians about them. You can find credible science communicators online that are doing this kind of work. I think all of that's really important. And I'm not saying it's easy at all, because I think it's very difficult to navigate in modern times. And again, I hate to have a pessimistic view of this stuff, but when we look to the US, and at one point I would have been recommending the CDC or the NIH, which are the US's major health organizations, to get this kind of accurate information as well. And now I don't think those places can be trusted, because they are now under the thumb of the MAHA movement. So.
Well, I was going to end by asking you, since you've written this book, what has changed? And I guess it's the acceleration of the anti-science movement in the United States. Is that the biggest change you've seen, or is there anything else you want to talk about?
I think that's the biggest one. I think, predating the book, I think one of the biggest factors, pseudoscience and misinformation has always been around, but I think why we're really seeing it problematic nowadays is social media. I think that's really catalyzed the pervasiveness of misinformation. I can give a really quick example where, there is, I was fortunate to be part of a research team where we looked at the top 1,000 videos on TikTok with the hashtag mental health. And we analyzed those videos for the ones that had content and advice giving and information. And so when we looked at these top 1,000 videos, the hashtag mental health in a specific time frame in October 2021, and we found that 33% of videos with the hashtag mental health were misleading. And that's a big number. But more mind-blowing than that was that of those videos that were misleading, they were viewed over 1 billion times. 1 billion. So that just shows how pervasive this stuff is, because our brains aren't very good at differentiating familiarity from the truth. That's called the illusory truth effect. So the more times we see and hear misinformation, the more likely we are to believe it. So anyways, I think social media, that's only one example of how social media has amplified the mess we're in. But I think alongside, or the parallel process there, is that misinformation and anti-science movements have indeed become very politicized. They are now, especially in the US, they're literally baked into the institutions themselves, where Donald Trump posted on social media yesterday or the day before just a unequivocal anti-vaccine video, literally saying that all vaccines are poison. So that's it made it, so to speak. The anti-science movements made it. Like they've gone mainstream, and that's what makes it very dangerous. And the problem with that is that when you intermingle politics and science, you're going to get people who identify politically believing anything that comes out of their political movement. So they'll believe, they won't be able to evaluate the science based on evidence. They're just going to evaluate it based on who's telling them, aka Donald Trump or RFK Jr.
Well, I've had other guests, though, that all say that also happens on the left. For example, the left is more likely to believe that GMOs are bad for you, or whatever. Like, there's certain things on both sides of the political spectrum. There are sort of tropes, as you say, that are misleading, and people are more likely to decide where they stand based on their political affiliation than actual evidence.
Absolutely. And this is a fascinating area of research that, again, my friend Timothy Caulfield is doing right now. And historically, it really was the left that was sort of the home of the quote unquote crunchy moms and the alternative medicine gurus and the wellness gurus, and even the anti-vaccine movement. Its home was the left. What we've seen, though, since the pandemic, is there's a phenomenon called conspirituality, and that's also based on the name of a book. Derek Barris and Matthew Remski and Julian Walker wrote it, and it was really this merger of the wellness world with far-right conspiracies like QAnon and MAGA promoting this kind of stuff. So I think that's what we've seen, is the anti-vaccine movement and the wellness industry shifted from the left to the right just in recent years, and it's a really fascinating phenomenon.
I agree. I'm so fascinated by it. Oh, actually, before you go, you said that there are some science communicators that you know and trust. I mean, when you said that TikTok thing, you said 33% was misleading. And, the Pollyanna in me is like, that means that the vast majority was not misleading. So who are you following and who are you liking as far as science communicators right now?
Well, I'll quickly throw a damper on that mood just for the hell of it, because we replicated the methodology of another study that just looked at the top ADHD TikTok videos, and 50% of those videos are misleading. But anyways, it's 50-50. Okay.
Yeah.
But God, there's, that's one of the, I'm really, raining on the social media parade, but at the same time, there is a lot of good that comes out of it too. Like us talking on being able to share these insights. And like you mentioned, there's a wonderful science communication community out there. There's so many, that I would recommend. Jennifer Gunter for women's health. Andrea Love does amazing work.
She's been on the show.
Jess Steyer, has she? Amazing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Jess Steyer. God, there's so many to name. I follow all of these folks. So if people want to go to my Instagram and then look who I follow and then follow those people, that's it. That's who I'm doing.
Perfect. Well, I'll definitely leave that link in the show notes. Anything you want to close with, Jonathan, other than following you on social media? Is there anything else you'd like to direct people to if they want to learn more about the work that you're doing?
I just like to reiterate one of the points we mentioned earlier, that none of this is about blame or shame, and that, when people are suffering from health conditions, it's normal and natural to want to find what ails them. And it's understandable why people will seek alternative medicine and modern medicine. I've done it. My family's done it. So I get that. My goal with this, our chat and the book is to just empower people and embolden people to just become more aware, increase those mental health literacy skills, learn the language of pseudoscientific grift and wellness grift so that they just better protect themselves from it. And so the best place to find me and my book is just my website. It's my first and last name. So Jonathan Stea, JONATHANSTEA.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I so appreciate your time today.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Well, hey, I hope you enjoyed that. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you heard something that pissed you off. Maybe you are a big believer in homeopathy, for example. If that's you, I can relate. I have certainly spent some money on homeopathy in the past. And dude, I started the show telling you about the potato slices on my boob, which didn't work, by the way. I ended up on antibiotics to clear the infection. And I guess what's happened for me recently is that I've come to admit that my experience is that none of the alternative wellness practices have ever really made a big difference for me. So when I read Jonathan's book, it made sense to me. But there was also a little bit of mourning there because I love thinking of myself as alternative, as open-minded, as holistic, and all those natural healing buzzwords. So of course, as we discussed in the podcast, the culture around this has changed so much recently that I'm affected by that, of course, as well. But I'd love to hear where you are at. As always, feel free to leave me a voice message using the SpeakPipe link below or send me a message on Instagram via DM. Until next week. Hey dude, thanks for listening. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you can get the next one. And by the way, if you rate and review this podcast, it really helps me get found by other people who need some goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. And be sure to connect and DM me at Una Duncan on Instagram and let me know what you thought of the episode. Chat soon.